Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Para Connection Podcast. You're here with Schuler. Sadly, the rest of the team wasn't able to join me today, but that's all right because we have a special guest joining the podcast today, and that is Jim Harold from Jim Harold's Campfire and the Paranormal Podcast. Now, if you remember back to a few podcasts ago, quite a few, we actually had Ron Hood from Ron's Amazing Stories on the podcast, along with Sylvia Schultz. Now, those two guys are great, and along with them is Jim Harold. So these three guys, I have to say, are some of the original OGs of podcasting. First time that I got into podcast, it was these guys that I listened to, and their stories were just phenomenal. So role model material right here. So without a doubt, it is an honor to have Jim on the podcast with us today and to speak a little bit about how he got into the podcasting world and also some personal experiences that he had with the supernatural. Or if you will, head scratchers, aka the unknown. So again, I say without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in today's podcast and get Jim on the line. All right, we got Jim on the line. Jim, are you there?
I am there. How are you today, sir?
Awesome. Pretty good, Jim. Pretty good. Thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. It's always a privilege to get to talk to people about spooky stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that, especially with you, Jim. You were one of the first podcasters I've had the privilege myself of listening to, so to have you on our podcast, that's just phenomenal.
Well, it's an honor to be here, and I enjoy coming on other podcasts and talking about these subjects, because I think we all have something to learn. I don't think really anybody has the answers, and we're all asking the same types of questions, and we kind of just all bring our different spin to it. So the more the merrier, I say.
Exactly. You know, that's the way I look at it too. It's kind of like a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle, and there's just pieces all over the place, which we call the world, and you try to drag those pieces to one place, and podcasting, I feel, is a great place to do it.
Yep, agreed.
So, Jim, to start off, I've also had the privilege to talk with Ron Hood and Sylvia Schultz. I think you've been able to talk with them as well.
Oh, yes. Both great guests.
Oh, absolutely. So there's kind of like a little paranormal triangle going on, so it's fantastic to have everybody on board and kind of share all their different insights and everything. And to start this, my curiosity goes with, how did you start off with the podcast world? How did you get into podcasting yourself?
Well, the thing is that I had gone to school to be in front of the mic or the camera. That was that's what I was geared towards when I was in school. And I ended up working in radio, but on the business side. And that's what I was doing in 2005 when I discovered this thing called podcasting. It was a very, very early days. Nobody knew what it was. It's like this little niche thing on the internet that just a few people were doing. And a lot of people were doing homemade podcasts. I'm like, you know what? I've got a broadcasting background. I've been working in radio for over a decade, not in front of the mic, but this is something that I think I want to do, because at that point I had a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage, so it wasn't like I could quit my job in the business side of media, in radio specifically, and just say, I'm going to go to a small market radio station and start. So I said, you know what, just as a hobby, I'll do this podcasting thing. And I got to thinking about it. It's like, well, what do I really enjoy? What do I keep coming back to that's fascinated me my whole life? And I thought about different things, and the one I kept coming back to was that of the supernatural and the paranormal. And when I talk about paranormal stuff, to me, paranormal means anything outside of the normal, unexplained phenomena, everything from ghosts to UFOs to cryptid creatures. But anyway, I'd always been a fan of Coast to Coast AM, for example. When I was a little kid, what really got me going with the paranormal was a show. You guys are probably too young to remember it, but it was called In Search Of. It was with Leonard Nimoy. And ever since then, every time I would go into a library or a bookstore, when those kind of still existed, all those bookstores now, I would go right to the supernatural section. And I said, you know what? I would love to do a podcast on the paranormal. Now, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm like, well, it's a paranormal podcast. It's a paranormal podcast. What could I call it? And lo and behold, it was so early, guys, that I looked out there and nobody had taken the name The Paranormal Podcast. So I said, I think I will. And it became The Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold. And I've been doing that show since the summer of 2005. So we're quickly approaching the 15th anniversary of that. And we put out 629 episodes as of yesterday as we record this. Plus, I've added another podcast. I've added multiple podcasts, but probably the one I'm best known for, and it's actually surpassed the Paranormal Podcast in popularity, is Campfire, Jim Harold's Campfire. I've been doing that since 2009, and it's just been great. And I did it as a labor of love for many years. Didn't make a penny off of it for several years. And then ended up being able to turn it into my full-time job in 2012, and here we are.
Wow. Jim, that is a long pathway, but a very good one, if I must say.
Well, thank you. And the thing is that I'm still, the beauty of it is like marries all of my interests, right? Broadcasting, podcasting, broadcasting, technology, and the main part of it that I've never lost a fascination with, and that is the supernatural. I'm still fascinated. And, I interview a lot of people for this show, several people, these various shows that I do. And every week I get a few books here in what I call the spooky studio. And I'll pick one up. I'm like, ooh, that's a good one. I can't wait to hear what they have to say. Or the same with Campfire. When somebody calls in with a tremendously creepy story, I'm like, ooh, that's a good one. And you kind of know you found the right thing for you when 15 years in, you still get excited, you're still interested, you still I have more questions now than I ever did. So it's really worked out great, but it's all born from a legitimate interest in the mysteries of life.
That is fantastic, Jim. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that. I mean, you're taking the aspect of what you said you have the passion of, which is broadcasting, and then the fascination of the paranormal. And quite honestly, that is the role model type of stuff I look for. And I think that's where you and even Ron from Ron's Amazing Stories, you guys kind of tied me into that. And I shared this idea with my team. And we're from Indiana, and we go around and we talk to people and we try to help them and whatnot. And we try to think of different ideas on how we could further branch what we do for people and how to understand the unknown and how to not be afraid and to even share their stories so they don't feel like they're alone or losing their mind. And podcasting has proven to be a wonderful outlet for that because it's a way to connect with different people and communities and also share a vast amount of information, or at least theories, to where people will, like you say, Jim, have a head scratcher.
Yeah, exactly. Those are my favorites. The ones that kind of make you go, what was up with that? Those are some of my favorite ones. And the thing is that we're all in this together because, and I've had multiple guests say this, and I firmly believe that there really are no experts. I don't think that anybody has it 100% figured out. I think we're all trying to grasp at these questions that humanity has dealt with for eons. What happens after we die? Is there a God? Is there such a thing as ghosts? These are really the big questions. And, we get wrapped up in the things that go on every day with politics and people fighting with one another. But these are things that doesn't matter what we believe politically or what country we're in or whatever, we all have them in common as humans. The nature of reality, it's stuff really, I think, to bring people together rather than rip them apart.
Oh, absolutely, Jim. Yeah, that's something I personally tell people all the time. I'm like, if you really step back for just a brief moment and you look at what life has to offer, what it really is, it's more than just getting into your car, going to work, making a paycheck, going to the grocery store. There's so much more to it, but the way society has, reformed itself over all these years, everyone is just so narrow-minded into the physical world. You have to, like you said, believe in politics, get up and go to work, and there's just so much more. There's opportunity out there, and here we are trying to figure it out.
Well, the other thing that I would say is that, I also have my feet on the ground. I think you can do. I think there's this thought that if you believe, among some people, if you believe in this paranormal, supernatural stuff, that you're, head in the clouds, you're not a real. But I think, I feel like I can walk and chew gum at the same time. What I do here is a business. This is a business, and I have to take in more money than I put out. I have to look at it as any other business. But so I am very feet on the ground. I've got 2 daughters. One's in college. The next one's almost done with high school. I had to work to put them through there. So, I think you can do both. You can be a realist. You can go to that job every day, but that doesn't mean that you don't have other interests, and realize that job and the kind of work-a-day stuff and the everyday stuff, yeah, that's an important part of life, and you got to do that stuff. But let's not ignore this whole other spiritual side, this whole other side of mystery. Because the thing is that I've come to the conclusion is that the world and reality is a far stranger place than we realize. I have a feeling that if somebody could open our eyes and explain all this stuff to us, we would be like mind blown. I think reality is so much bigger than we give it credit for. So to be able to hold that together, where you get the groceries, if you're cold climate, you shovel the snow, you go to work, but then you also realize that that's just one little compartment of life, and you've got all these big questions. And I think trying to do both, that's a trick. But I try to keep that in mind, that it's not just about making a paycheck. It's about exploring these bigger mysteries.
Jim, that is one of the best breakdowns I've heard in quite some time.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. No, and with it also not just being a breakdown, but it is what it is, because there are some things that people have told me, I've personally experienced, that really does verify the things that you're talking about. There are 2 aspects to life. And sometimes a lot of people, more commonly than not, they get caught up with the physical side of the world, and they don't have time. They don't want to believe in the spiritual side of the world. And that's where that mindset is just so blocked. It's just a blockade. And whenever you're able to find yourself in the middle to try to bring everything together, it can make a more peaceful life, in my personal opinion. Just in the past 3 years with the paranormal team and the podcast world and everything, it's really helped me understand I'm not the only one that's had questions. I'm not the only one that had blockades of not understanding. I'm not the only one with frustrations, and it all comes together again like a puzzle, and it really helps when you have other people to verify that with you. And it's like this conversation here, they're eye openers to me.
Yeah, the thing for me, the way I look at it is this, is that, I've actually found doing the podcast and talking to so many people reassuring, because I would hate to think that, we're here, and life has joys just in and of itself, raising 2 kids, having a great marriage, all that's all great. Having something that's fun to do, that's all great stuff. But I'd be really depressed if I thought this was the whole thing. If this was, you get your 70, and if you're lucky, maybe a little bit more, and then lights out, it's all over, very materialistic. That would be really depressing to me. And some people would say, because I come from, my background was a Christian background. Not like, I wasn't a super churchgoer or anything like that, although I'd been exposed to some of that during high school and that time. But I've always had an underlying faith. And if anything, all of this strengthens my faith that there is something beyond our lives. And I find actually exploring the supernatural and talking to like-minded individuals reassuring. That being said, on the shows, we talk about some spooky stuff, things like shadow people and the Hat Man. So I think personally, I think to everything there's a yin and a yang, right? Okay. I think there's a lot of good out in the world, and I think there's a lot of evil. And I carry that into the spiritual world. I believe there's good, and I believe there's evil. It really expands your mind to think of these big questions and get to. I love talking to the authors, and I also love just talking to folks who have had strange experiences. I find them both very interesting and very fascinating.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Jim. In listening to your podcast, I have heard some stories on there that were truly out of this world, and some I could actually relate to as a paranormal investigator. And the funny thing is, before I got into podcasts, before I got into the whole paranormal situation, I never personally had any type of supernatural encounters. At least not that I can remember. The only thing I can recall is having a imaginary friend, a very intelligent one, not just one that I would say is there, but I mean that's a whole nother story, and I've even covered that with a couple of people with that imaginary friend theory being paranormal or just children's imaginations. But other than that, I've never had any type of encounters or anything outstanding. It wasn't until 2011 when I went looking for it. That's when this world opened up to me, and then ever since the podcast world also entered my life, it's just like, wow, there's so much more out there. There's a lot of people experiencing this stuff. And I mean, I get it. There is fabrication out there. I've seen it personally, unfortunately, but I mean, it's ignorance isn't always bliss. It's good to be aware of that stuff. But I've also experienced more real people and encounters than I have, fake and fabricated. But when, like you said, it's that verification that you get from other people that really helps you continue to move forward and to see that there is possibly something after this physical life. Oh yeah, it's a lot better than just thinking that it's going to be a black screen, because that most definitely would be depressing.
And the thing is that I think people experience things in different ways. You said you really, until you start looking for it, you hadn't experienced a lot. Now, I've never been, first of all, I'm not an investigator. Hats off to people who do it. I just, I kind of look at myself like, it's the difference between a sportscaster and somebody who's actually playing the game. And I do like to keep, in a way, a little bit of a distance, in the sense that I can interview and talk to people with different beliefs, and I don't really have, I have my own beliefs, obviously, but I don't have this attachment, well, this is the way to do it. So I've kind of almost intentionally made myself a spectator in some ways rather than a participant. But I do think people experience the other side of life in different ways. I tend to, I believe, experience it in very subtle ways. I'm not one of these people who has seen, ghosts that I know of, or, seen a UFO per se. I mean, I've seen one I thought was a streaking comet or something once, but nothing like that. But I have these little weird happenstance stories that happen to me that ending up kind of like these synchronicities that are just kind of, some of them are, I think, pretty mind-blowing. And it seems like that's the way the universe communicates things to me for whatever reason. Maybe it's because the other side recognizes that I'll pick up on it. I don't know, but I have these weird coincidences that happen to me that I don't believe are coincidences.
Gotcha. So, Jim, with that being said, do you feel like you have some type of intuition with sensitivity, or...
Not in the sense that some people are sensitive about things like ghosts and things like that, but I do think I get hints of things, I do think I have a good sense of intuition. I get hints about things, and I do believe that. I don't think I'm particularly sensitive. I used to say I'm about as sensitive as a board, but I don't really think that's accurate, because I've had these little strange happenstances happen to me. So I just think that's the way I get it, or by these little hints. And I think sometimes other people, the universe, like, presents things to them. That's why you have psychic people who can walk in a room and, they can feel energies and things. I don't have that as much. So I would in no way say that I'm psychic or anything like that. But I think I have some intuition and some intuitive type things, but nothing you would ever call psychic or anything like that. No.
Okay. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that, Jim. It's like you said, it's not more so the spiritual aspect of it, but it's I guess you can say universal. In my personal belief, I feel like there is some type of intelligent life form, regardless if you can call it spiritual or another physical, more advanced life form. There is some type of intelligent connection to what you're actually seeing, what you're catching up on. Something stands out for a reason. And that kind of goes along with the rest of the team and I. We come from different, beliefs, spiritual backgrounds. I was raised Christian. I've more so in the past decade became a spiritualist, if you will. I do believe in God. I do believe in a Jesus Christ and all the positive vibes and stuff. But I also believe in and open to other religions, if you will, and that each one
Right.
kind of has like a different piece of the puzzle. Not every one religion has the answer, but it's more of like just a scattered puzzle. And at one point in time, if we are ever able to come together, united we stand, divided we fall, we can finally get that answer. But we have failed to do that yet. But that's kind of the whole goal and mission, I think. And that's what drives me, in a more religious belief, is getting to meet different people, having different spiritual backgrounds. I've had atheists on the team. I've had satanics. I've had Luciferists. I've had Methodist, Catholic, you name it. And it's been really interesting to have these people come on. And for the mere fact that, at least, knock on wood, and by my luck, we haven't had any arguments when it comes to beliefs or religions or anything like that. When we investigate, we work together. We have one set goal, and that's to understand the unknown. And everyone has different beliefs. Some believe in, more so the nature or the universe, having that intuition, that connection. Others believe that it's God directly. Others believe that it's Jesus Christ. Different things like that. So when you say that you have that pull of intuition, that really spikes my mind there of thinking of all the different connections that I've made with other people and how they believe they can be contacted from, if you will, another side.
Well, do you mind? Can I share a story that happened to me that I thought was really pretty wild? And it's not a traditional ghost story, but I thought it shows something about how we can get communication.
Jim, that would be fantastic. Please go ahead.
Well, about a year, it must have been 2017 now, I'm thinking, fall of 2017. I'm just trying to recall here. I believe that's when it was. And I was on a cruise, and I had been asked to appear along with Micah Hanks, who is, I did a podcast with for a good while, and who's a great guy and a really good researcher in the areas of UFOs and ancient mysteries. And then with the legendary Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who, she passed last year, and it was a great loss. I think she was one of the greatest researchers in all of these areas that we had. But anyway, we were at this cruise, and one of the features of the cruise was for us to all talk about, our areas of expertise or so forth, and present on different topics. And I came up with a topic of black-eyed kids, which is not necessarily my expertise, but I've done multiple shows on it with some different guests, and I've actually had the opportunity to interview the guy who kind of started that whole thing with his account in the 90s, so I did a presentation on that. But Micah and Rosemary, I think, had finished their presentations. I was going to be up next, so I said, you know what I'd better do? I'd better go get some coffee, because I had a little bit of a cold. So anyway, we were in this conference room on the ship, and I started to step out of the conference room, and right next to it is the casino for this ship, right? So one of our attendees was playing one of these crane games. It's like on a claw that comes down, and it was grabbing money. And I had a very strong thought of my uncle, who had passed a few years earlier. My uncle was like my second dad. He lived with us growing up, and really it was like my two dads, because I spent just as much time with my uncle as I did with my dad. And I absolutely loved the guy. Well, he had passed a few years earlier, and I remember having this thought, man, I wish he were here so he could play that game, because he loved going to stores, and when he would be done at the store, they would have those games with the stuffed toys in the little lobby area, right? You've probably seen it.
Oh, yeah.
And he would put like $10 in when to win a little 99-cent tchotchke toy just because he liked playing the game. So anyway, I said, man, I wish he was here. I know that you're not going to beat the casino, but he would just love the act of playing this. I wish he were here. So anyway, a woman walks up next to this guy, cups her hand to her mouth, and says, John. And, I just about lost it. Because guess what my uncle's name was?
It was John.
It was John. And again, now, the skeptic would say, mere coincidence. But I say, I had to walk out of that room at that particular time. The guy had to be playing it to draw my attention to it. Then I had to think of it. And at the same time, a woman looking for, I guess, her husband had to walk up to him at the same time, cup her hand to the mouth, and say his name twice.
Wow.
I mean, what are the chances? What are the chances? So in my experience, my supernatural experiences have been like that, like convoluted and coincidental, but very much real, I think. I had another one when I think I was probably about 18 years old, and my family, I'm from Ohio, born and raised in Ohio, but my family was from West Virginia. And I ran down there to visit family one time, and apparently there was this young lady in the town who had seen me around and about and wanted to get to talk to me. For some reason, I don't know if she needed a stronger eyeglass prescription or what was going on. But anyway, we met and we were walking in this little town with this 2-lane road, and there was a huge log truck sitting along the left side of the road as we approached it. And we split up. One went on one side, one on the other, and we walked by it. And I just remember thinking, I need to get away from this truck. So I quickened my pace a little bit. Past the truck, we met back up on the other side, bread and butter style. And we continued to talk and thought nothing of it. Maybe went 15 feet, 20 feet. And then all of a sudden I heard a rumble. Turns out every log on my side of the truck had fallen off. The chains must have given way. Now let me ask you.
Wow.
Why would I know that? How would I know that? Was that just a coincidence?
Man.
I don't think so.
Yeah, Jim,
Yeah.
Little things like that, like you're saying, they're little jabs that are just nicking you in the head. It's kind of like the Spider-Man thing, spider senses, or tingling, and
Yeah.
how do you get that,
And I remember very specifically, that was so intense. I need to get away from this. So I didn't run. I just walked a little faster. And then, boom.
Wow.
I mean, that probably would have, those big log trucks, those logs are huge. And it was multiple logs. It probably would have killed me.
Yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't have done you any good, Jim. That's for sure.
And
I
then
know.
stories like that are the kind that we feature on Campfire. People calling with our whole story. Some of them are way more, people will see full body apparitions, different things will happen. But that's the premise of Campfire. People call in and share their stories.
Yeah, situations like that, that does make for a good campfire story. And, head scratchers, as you call them, Jim, because, you can align that type of story as paranormal, but at the same time, there's going to be so many people that are like, absolutely not. You didn't see a spirit pointing at the logs. You didn't see see your Uncle John, but you had these little like mental spiritual jabs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if it's just that the universe says, well, this is the kind of thing he recognizes, or I'm not sensitive enough, where people actually, I don't know. But that's the way it seems to happen for me.
That is really interesting, Jim, and thank you for sharing those stories with us, because you have my gears grinding over here, and the way I'm thinking right now is it's just like, I personally, even without being a paranormal investigator, my mom, she would grow up watching Sylvia Brown and other little psychic shows, and I know everyone has their opinions about the celebrity psychics, but I've always been aware of what a psychic is and, kind of like spiritual intuition. Didn't fully understand it, but I was kind of exposed to it. And as I've gotten older, little things like that, your stories stand out to me, and I personally would consider them paranormal. Even without being a paranormal investigator, just for the mere fact that they're unexplainable, it's not natural, what we would consider supernatural, if you will, because you're having these random thoughts of your uncle, you're having these random thoughts of danger, and it's not like you have any reason to, it just kind of hits
right. I'll give you another one that happened to me.
Please do.
And again, this doesn't necessarily, sometimes the campfire stories are more dramatic, and I'd be glad to share a couple of those with you to give you a sense of some of those stories. But I kind of laugh because, I'm, as a podcaster goes, I'm relatively successful in the sense I'm able to do it for full-time living. But I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not This American Life. I'm not NPR. I mean, I'm not wealthy or anything like that. I make a middle-class living doing a podcast or podcast, and I'm blessed for that, but people get the wrong idea. There's this one guy who in England who says, that Jim Harold, he's a millionaire and can afford all that equipment, and it makes me laugh. I kind of chuckle and say, oh, if only you knew, buddy. But the funny thing was is that, so I was shopping at the dollar store one day. That's why I mentioned it. I was shopping at the dollar store, I think actually to get some mailers to send some books out to some listeners or something. So that shows you what a high budget operation we have here. But anyway, my mom passed within 2 weeks of my uncle passing when that happened in 2013. And this was probably 3-4 years later. And I was at this dollar store, and I saw this woman who looked remarkably like my mom. I mean, so much so that if my mom were still alive and I were in the same store with her, I might mistake this woman for my mom because she had the same glasses, same hairstyle, same height, same body type, everything.
Wow.
So that was kind of weird. I thought, hey, they say everybody has a doppelganger, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I explained it away. So I get my envelopes or whatever I need, and then I walk in line, and lo and behold, guess who's in front of me? Is this woman. And she has her stuff, and she has a bottle of Pepsi, I think it is. And I'm standing there kind of maybe looking at my phone, waiting, because there were 2 or 3 people in line before us. She turns around to me and has the bottle of pop and said, "Can you open this for me?" And I thought, I was blown away. I'm like, what are the chances? I'm 50 years old. I'm an old guy. I've been in many store lines. I don't remember anybody ever turning around and saying, "Open this for me." and it was kind of like, I see you, Mom. I see what you're doing. You're messing with me, aren't you? Or at least you're saying, "Hey, I'm still around."
Yeah.
So I think that's the way that I'm communicated with little things like that. Now, many people would say, no, I don't think that's as dramatic as the cruise ship story. But still, it was an odd set of circumstances that came together. And it just makes me wonder.
It does, Jim. And that's the same thing that makes me wonder, too. Like, regardless if this woman was a real person, different identity, she just happened to have the same features, very similar features to your mom.
Yeah, I mean, she struck me as a totally real person.
Yeah. Yeah, and, with that being said, it's just like, what are the chances that it would be her that you would see that day, around that time period, and then she would also have an interaction with you? That just really stands out. But there's also another theory, this is going a little further out. I'm sure a lot of people have laughed at me, but this is how open I am. The theory is there can be guardian angels, spirit guides, or it could even be your actual mother. And somehow, this is a science I have no idea how to research or how it works, but they can materialize themselves as a real person and interact with you. And it's not like you went and, followed this woman to her home, made sure she had an identity and a car and a job. It was a one-time encounter, so for all you know, it could have been a spirit guide or an angel or even your mom. And then after that, the person the spirit was gone, and then that was your interaction. But at the same time, more logical, it could have just been someone with very similar features, and it was one of those just real quick connections. But it still makes your mind just go like 1,000 miles a minute.
It does. It does, and it stuck with me. And the thing is that things have happened to my family, things have happened to me. I think they've ramped up a little bit more since I've been doing these shows, and that maybe I recognize things a little more, but there have been some really interesting things. The log story was before podcasting was we're talking about like 1990 or something, so, or 89 or 90, so this is way before podcasting was ever conceptualized.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really, it's really interesting what might be up there. And I really do. I love hearing the stories of my callers because theirs tend to be a little more dramatic.
Yeah, and some of those stories too, Jim, it's like it's not even paranormal spiritually related. Like some of the stories that you've gotten, you could categorize some of these as like cryptids or interdimensional creatures, and we're talking on a physical plane type of thing. At least that's what I've gathered from some of your callers while listening, and it's just remarkable. And I'm sure this is one of your favorites, but one of the well-known ones is the black-eyed children, or the men in black, or the women in black. There's so many different conceptions about these alleged beings. One is that they're alien, another is that they're demons, another is that they're time travelers, people. There's just different things. And I would like to have your opinion on here, Jim. What do you believe black-eyed children or men in black, women in black derive from? Well, what's the first thing that you think?
Yikes. Well, one thing that comes to mind is, I think on some of these darker situations, I think there's a trickster element.
Okay.
And one of the things that Rosemary Ellen Guiley used to talk about a lot, and frankly, it's something that freaks me out, honestly, is the idea of something like the jinn. And if your audience isn't familiar with that, you spell that Djinn. And it actually, it's kind of where the idea of genies came from. The genies we see in Jumanji or popular entertainment, I Dream of Jeannie, actually came from the idea of the jinn. And they're kind of like these, I don't want to mischaracterize it because I'm not an expert, but they're these entities that are on the darker side, a little more sinister side, and they are tricksters. And that would explain a lot of things like shape-shifting or coming in various forms or those kind of things. So I often, and that would, to me, would extend to things like, and the reason I mention them for black-eyed kids is this. I have, in people I've talked to who have done a lot of research on black-eyed kids, and Brian Bethel, who was the original black-eyed kid experiencer, or at least the one that's best known, these black-eyed kids always get something slightly off. They might, and I'm just, I don't know if this actual example, but they might say something like, they might come to your door and say, I want some mayonnaise for my apple. They kind of have it right, but things that they say don't quite make sense.
Yeah.
And the jinn, as I understand it, and this is largely from Rosemary's work and the talks I've heard her give on them, is that they can morph into something, but they can't get 100% right. That's like one of the limitations on them. And that, to me, extended to the idea of the black-eyed kids. Well, maybe that extends to their interaction, that they can kind of look like a kid, but they have all black eyes, so they're not 100%, what they're posing to be, and maybe in their interaction, they can't get it 100% right, so they get something slightly off. I'd like to drink this watermelon, or whatever it might be. They say things that don't make sense. So that's one. I'm not saying it is the answer, but it's just one thing that came to mind for me.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, to think about a jinn, because that does go into the more sinister and darker side of the supernatural. And obviously that's where black-eyed children kind of come from. It's never really been conceived as a positive entity. And from the stories,
No.
from the stories I've listened to and have even been told, they're not exactly free-willed, I guess, if you can call it that, Jim. They always tend to ask for permission to come into your home or your car or into your life entirely, right?
Right. Yeah. That's what I've always heard, and you have to give them permission. I am not giving them permission if they ask me. No way.
No.
way.
Even for me as a paranormal investigator, it's not worth the evidence. Not with what allegedly could come from that, and it's just really interesting that, one little factor like the black eyes or the way that they form a sentence that can throw the whole thing off and let you know that something's wrong. And I mean, it seems like it goes towards people that are more fond of children or that have a bigger heart that want to be helpful. Those are the people that they kind of go after. And it's just really interesting, how there's different entities with similar intentions, similar abilities, similar limitations, like jinn, black-eyed children, and it kind of all comes together. And it just makes you wonder if it's like the telephone game. It changes over time, but it's the same entity.
Right. That concept to me, it's just frightening to think that there is evil out there. But to me, it's a situation where I think all you have to do is look at life.
Yes.
And I know sometimes there's psychiatric reasons and things, but if you look at some of these serial killers, if you look at the Jeffrey Dahmers, the Ted Bundys, the John Wayne Gacy's of the world, Hitlers of the world, to me, it's not just a psychological problem. I think when you get to that depth, I believe there's something encouraging that kind of depravity. There's something spurring it along. Maybe there are those issues existent, but there's something evil. I believe evil is real. I mean, I wish it weren't, because I talk to, on some of my shows, a lot of my New Age friends. And they've got a lot of great things to say, and I think they provide a lot of value. But sometimes I'll say, well, do you believe in such a thing as good and evil? And they say, well, there's not really evil. There's a lower vibration. And I'm like, John Wayne Gacy, there's evil. That's just my kind of thinking.
Yeah, and Jim, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, if what they mean by lower vibration is pure evil, then I do agree with that, because the things that are done by serial killers and people of that type of intention, I mean, I don't think there's any logical way to say that that's natural or acceptable or any way positive by any means.
Right.
And I do agree with that. And, I've talked about serial killers and people with, quote unquote mental challenges or the criminally insane, if you will, and the influence of the possibility of spiritual oppression. They may not personally want to do what they're doing, but with whatever is wrong with them mentally or the vulnerability that they have with their spiritual energy, there's something that leeches onto them, and it gives them that influence to go forward with doing something completely and utterly terrible. And spiritual,
I mean, I know that's somewhat controversial, but I kind of think that's a possibility as well. Not that I don't doubt that many of these people are dealing with some kind of psychological situation, because how could a sane person do these things? I mean, if there's not insanity, it's for sure an evil spirit. And I think it's a varying degree too. I think some pretty sane people do some pretty awful things. I think when you get into these darker levels of depravity, I think many times there's some kind of level of evil. But if you think about it, if I remember correctly, part of the definition of criminally insane is that, if somebody tries to cover up what they do, they're not totally insane because they don't realize it's wrong. They don't realize there's something to cover up.
Yeah.
So if they start covering up things, which, many of these serial killers and so forth do, and they have ways to cover their tracks. And I did a show, for a long time I did a true crime show, even before Serial was popular, the podcast, even before they were the rage. And I did an interview, one of the last interviews I did for that show last year was about this serial killer by the name of Israel Keys. And what he would do is he would go to different towns and he would bury murder kits. And then he would go from town to town and use them to kill a random person. So he just did it for sport or fun or whatever.
Wow.
And there he had to be somewhat sane it was diabolical, it was awful, but he's obviously and he would max out these credit cards, and he wouldn't care because he knew that, eventually he'd end up in jail or dead, and I do believe he killed himself or he died, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But somebody who has that level of evil ingenuity to figure out how to kill people and get away with it, because usually killers like that operate in a certain radius, right?
Yeah.
But he would fly clear across the country to dig up one of these murder kits, kill somebody, fly back home, and they wouldn't have a trace on him. So just unbelievable the depths that these people, some of them, will go to apply their evil deeds.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. There has to be a difference between spiritual oppression with someone, kind of being guided by something negative compared to someone that just is pure evil. Wherever they got the seed from, that is just what they have, and that's what they're made up of. And it's terrible, but it is a very real thing. And sadly, we have to tie that in with the paranormal sometimes, because tragedies typically can bring about a haunting. And and there's just, evil is a thing, and it's terrible, whether it's considered a low vibration or not. It is a thing.
I wish it weren't. I wish it weren't, but I believe that it is.
Oh, absolutely, Jim. Yeah, I do agree with you on that. Jim, I hate to say this, but I think we're coming up on our time here. First off and foremost, I can't thank you enough for all the stories that you shared and your insight on everything, and even a little of your backstory on how you got into the podcast world. That was just fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I hope that everybody gets to check out the kind of show that I guide people to, and because I think it's the most relatable, and it's free. There's Jim Harold's Campfire. You can find that on all the major podcast apps. And if you like something like Ghost to Ghost AM that Coast to Coast AM does, if you like true ghost stories and just regular people who have had something weird happen to them, and we've had doctors and lawyers and ditch diggers and housewives, I mean, every walk of life. If that sounds like something that would appeal to you, just Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, just type in Jim Harold's Campfire and it's sure to pop up.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Jim. Along with that, do you have any other outlets people can reach you by, or, maybe ask you questions or get on?
Sure. I'm on Facebook, so you can just look up Jim Harold on Facebook. Also, I'm on Instagram under the Jim Harold. I only did that because somebody else had Jim Harold. And same with Twitter. I'm the Jim Harold on Twitter. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you can find me in all those places. Also, it's jimharold.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for that very much. Jim, I hope you've had a wonderful time, and I hope to get you back on the podcast, and hopefully next time I'll have the whole team, come up here with some questions for you.
Oh, that will be great. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Schuler. It's been a privilege, and I thank you for your time, and it's great to meet your audience. And again, continued success with the podcast and your investigation.
Thank you, Jim. All the best to you as well. That was phenomenal. Jim, thank you for coming on to the podcast once again and sharing some of your personal stories and also how you got into the podcasting world. It was a fantastic time talking with you. And for everyone listening, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast as well, learned some new things, had your mind opened up a little bit more, and of course, please follow Jim. He shared some really awesome outlets, so if you want to learn more about Jim or hear some stories that he has on his podcast, you know where to go. Also, with that being said, if you guys want to get further into the paranormal world with PILT Paranormal, you know what to do. Go to Google, type in PILT Paranormal, just like we always say, and you'll find everything about us that you may need or not need. You'll find our website, our podcast, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. So be sure to type that in, reach out to us if you want to get on the podcast, you have questions, concerns, comments, all that fun stuff. That's where to go. And again, this is another podcast that we have successfully finished up. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we hope that you come back for next time's podcast. Until that time, stay frosty.